Welcome everybody to this roundtable discussion. And my name is Jonathan Muhumusa, and I'll be moderating. I am with the marketing team here at One Lambda, part of Thermo Fisher Scientific. And for those of you who aren't aware of what we do, we are a leader in the transplant diagnostics field, transplant and transfusion. So we make products that help transplant and transfusion patients get better matches and get monitored along their path so that they don't have any complications. So, but I'm confident most of the people joining are already aware of this. And so today I'm very excited to have this panel of experts across the field of transplant and transfusion diagnostics to really just talk about an important subject that is often not mentioned or talked about enough, which is the role of race in transplant. And so let me just quickly make sure everybody is visible. So as you can see, we have a distinguished panel here, and I'll have everybody introduce themselves, but I'll quickly just mention their names for anyone that doesn't know them. So first we have Bobby Howard from LifeLink of Georgia, but he's also on the Donate Life of America Board of Directors, and he was a former president of the Association of Multicultural Affairs. We have Dr. Yvette Miller, who is the Executive Medical Officer at the American Red Cross. We have Dr. Mary Philogene. She's the Senior Director of Histocompatibility and Molecular Genetics at the American Red Cross as well. We do have Dr. Cathi Murphey. She's a director at Southwest Immunodiagnostics. And last but not least, we have Dr. Michael Gautreaux, who is the director of HLA at Wake Forest University. And so again, this panel was hand selected and curated to really talk about specific topics when it comes to the role of race in transfusion. So we're going to talk about everything from what the current events are and how they're affecting us, or everything from the Black Lives Matter protests to COVID, and all the way down to the scientific and technical reasoning why there are different situations and aspects that go into selecting donors. And as you can see at the bottom, all of this is to really wrap up August, which is National Minority Donor Awareness Month. So if you haven't been aware, this used to be a week, but it's been expanded into a month, and it's a way to really increase awareness for minority donors, because as we'll get into the discussion, they're very much needed, especially right now. So I'll quickly go over the agenda. I've already made the quick introduction. We'll talk about the current events and how they're impacting the minority donor pool. We'll talk about the scientific reasons why it's necessary. We'll talk about what the mechanisms are and how they're succeeding or not succeeding. And then we'll talk about next steps. So this will be a very fluid conversation, very, a round table. So it'll be very much a discussion and back and forth. And we do encourage you to type in your questions in the chat if you have any, and we'll make sure to address them either during the conversation or at a Q&A session. And so stop sharing there, and there we go. So without further ado, if the panel would like to introduce themselves, we'll start with Bobby.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for those of you who are on the West Coast. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to be with you today. I'm so excited because we are going to discuss some very important things and something that's near and dear to my heart. But once again, I'm Bobby Howard, and I'm the current director of the Multicultural Donation Education Program here at LifeLink of Georgia. I'm also a board member for Donate Life America. I'm a past president for AMAT, the Association for Multicultural Affairs and Transplantation. I think what you're going to hear today is something that's going to be very special, and just to enlighten and keep people in the know of what's going on in the minority communities as it pertains to organ donation and transplantation.
Hi, good afternoon and good morning for those again on the West Coast, and if we have any global attendees. I am Dr. Yvette Miller, and I am the Executive Medical Officer for the American Red Cross. And I've been with the organization July the 1st. It was 24 years. So I've been doing this job for a long time. And again, I am so excited to be at this roundtable and participate in this conversation about the blood needs for patients with sickle cell disease, as well as to talk about the transplantation issue. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation and am absolutely looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we can have Dr. Murphey, if you want to go next.
Sure, I'm Dr. Cathi Murphey, and I'm the director, the HLA lab director here in San Antonio at Southwest Immunodiagnostics, and we provide services for several different transplant programs, both bone marrow and solid organ. I'm also the past chair of the UNOS Histocompatibility Committee, so I've been dealing a lot with the histo issues that affect us as a community as a whole. So I'm very happy to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak today.
Correct. Thank you for being here. Dr. Philogene, if you want to go next.
Sure. Mary Philogene, I've been at the Red Cross for about 6 months now. And I thank you, Jonathan, for bringing up this topic and gathering all the guest speakers. I think it's a timely issue that needs to be addressed. Having been here at the Red Cross for the last 6 months, I know the issues that surround finding appropriate donors for sickle cell patients. And then having worked in the transplant world, it's something that we continuously try to improve. And that is recruiting minority donors for minority recipients. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Philogene. And last but not least, Dr. Gautreaux.
I'm Mike Gautreaux. I am the director of the laboratories at Wake Forest in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I'm a native of Louisiana, and I've been working with trying to help minorities be transplanted my entire career, starting in my native state of Louisiana, and then finally for over the last 20 years in the Carolinas, first in South Carolina, then finally in North Carolina. I'm a past president of the American Society of Histocompatibility and Immunogenetics, which is a professional organization for, better known as ASHI. Most people in the field know of ASHI. We are the professional society for HLA laboratories across the world. And I'm excited to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. Sorry,
Thank you, Dr. Chu. I thought you froze for a second. All right. Thank you everyone for those introductions. And you know, and I do want to highlight again the importance of every single one on this panel. It wasn't really just casting a wide net. We wanted to make sure we had experts on all these aspects that we're going to talk to. So, for example, Bobby Howard is a former recipient, a former organ recipient, so he could speak to the patient side of things as well, in addition to the work that he's doing. And you know, especially on the transplant side. And then we have Dr. Miller, who can speak to the transfusion side. And so to kick things off, so we only have an hour and a little less than that. We want to do a Q&A. But to kick things off, we do want to talk about just the general impact of the current events. So whether it's COVID, which has just ravaged every sort of healthcare, situation, across the world. And definitely we felt it in the transplant and transfusion side. But, I'd like to invite Dr. Miller to really talk about how COVID and how the protesting has really affected some of the blood supply at Red Cross, the numbers of donors, and then we'll talk about the transplant side with Bobby. Yvette?
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. So COVID-19 has really had a significant impact on the African-American community. And we know that in communities of color in general, and African-American communities specifically, those chronic conditions that increase a person's risk of acquiring COVID-19, hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, those medical conditions are at significant levels in the African American community. And so that's certainly one of the reasons why this community was hard hit. But then also the general lack of access to healthcare in general affected the increase in numbers of African American community being hit by COVID-19. And so in relationship to blood donors, the African American community also has, a high degree of distrust of anything that is perceived as medical, and particularly surrounding blood. And that's based on this historical situations and incidents that have affected the African American community, Tuskegee experiment, Henrietta Lacks, just the general lack of access to healthcare. And so we always struggle with having enough African-American donors to meet the transfusion needs of sickle cell patients. But when COVID-19 hit, the number of African-American donors that presented decreased 50 to 60%. And so even though we didn't, the elective surgeries were canceled, and so there was a decrease in need overall for transfusion, we were completely, the inventory to support the transfusion needs of sickle cell patients was absolutely decimated. It is starting to come back now, but it's not at its previous level consistently. So we are still struggling to meet the transfusion needs of sickle cell patients. And so African Americans have, and our panel is going to talk a little bit about this again as we go on, but just to start this conversation, African Americans have a very diverse genetic background. And so to identify a unit of blood specifically from an African American donor for an African American patient can be extremely difficult depending on what that antigen mix is, both in terms of RH and ABO. So it is critical that the African American community come out to donate. It's safe. We have all types of procedures in place that were recommended by the CDC in terms of preventing the transmission of COVID-19. So that's just the highlights of the situation, and then we will talk about this more.
I'd like to just jump in here if I could, and follow up what Yvette had just said about that, about ABOs and donation for our solid organ transplant patients, and particularly in our kidney patients. We have as you know, the O is the #1 blood group in the country, makes up about 44% of the population, followed by A, which is 42% of the population, and then the B blood group, which is only about 10% of the population. However, when you look at the deceased donor wait list for kidneys, the African Americans make up 32% of this, of our deceased donor kidney wait list, but 43% of our B blood group recipients that are on our wait list are African Americans. So you can see that predominantly the B blood group is made up with the African American population. And when you look at who gets transplanted in the United States, so again, predominantly it's the O blood group, but of the B blood group patients, only 14% of the total number of transplants in 2019 were of the B blood group. And of those, the African Americans only made up 38% of those transplanted. So you have 43% of the B blood group is African American, but they're only getting transplanted at a 38% rate. So this comes at some disadvantage for that blood group in the deceased donor population for kidney transplants.
Wow.
If I can add, that's why it's so important when you look at organ donation and the ability to go out and do education to enlighten the communities on how important donation is, especially in your minority communities. And so when you look at COVID and the impact that it's had on just the education alone of being locked in the house and doing a lot of things virtually, it has enabled us and stopped us from going out and doing that face-to-face in person. Because when you look at all these things, we talked about donation, blood donation, organ donation, tissue donation, everything hinges on trust. And sometimes when you're in a community and you have that trust, when you can be face-to-face and have that conversation where people can build a trust on whoever that person is delivering the message, that is so key. So COVID has truly had an impact on our educational efforts. Now, so far, we've had a slight downside in a number of people that we've had become organ and tissue donors, but that's starting to pick back up. But it's still not where it should be and not where we would like to be, because we have so many patients waiting for life-saving organ transplant. We're close to 110,000 people here in the United States waiting for a life-saving organ transplant. So COVID has definitely had an impact on everything that you think about when it pertains to organ tissue donation and even blood and bone marrow donation as well.
Thank you, Bobby. That is vital information. And I mean, we all know that the disparities in healthcare in general, but especially in the transplant transfusion side. So this is why it's so key to get people who can speak to these numbers and show the information, and really just as a way to spread awareness. So thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Yvette, and thank you, Cathi, for that. So to move on to the next topic, we also do have Dr. Gautreaux, Dr. Philogene, Dr. Cathi Murphey, who just are experts in the HLA side. Like Dr. Murphey just spoke to some of the AB groups, and we want to get a little deeper into the science, right? So the biology of why this is necessary. And so to go for it, I think Dr. Murphey, if you want to kind of take it on and speak a little more to the ABO groups, and then after that, we're going to have Dr. Philogene follow.
Sure. As I mentioned, in solid organ transplantation and in bone marrow transplantation, RH doesn't really figure in transplant roles as much as in transfusion medicine. So just in looking at the ABO blood groups, as I mentioned, the African American and also the Asian population, I should mention them as well, because 26% of the Asians have blood group B as their blood type as well. So they are also at disadvantage when faced with donation. And I know Mike and Mary are going to speak to a little bit more of this as well, but when you start looking at the HLA system and you start figuring in there's other genes that make it difficult for sensitized patients to be transplanted, then all of this really comes to a disadvantage for some of our patients, our patient populations.
Yeah. So the big question is why do we need African American donors for African American recipients? So I want to bring back a little bit of history and remind everyone that the first successful, so work in transplantation had been going on for a very long time, and through those years, they've identified certain markers that are absolutely important for transplantation to be successful, right? So that means for it to last for a very long time. And so the first successful kidney transplant was in 1954, and it happened with identical twins. And so one of the twins, Robert, donated a kidney to his sibling, to his identical sibling. And as just a side note, Robert, who's the donor, lived 59 years after this organ transplant. He died in 2010. And his sibling, Richard, who had been suffering from kidney disease, passed away 8 years after the transplant. And he died with a functional kidney. That means that the cause of death was not due to the organ transplant. So the reason this was a success is because they share genetic material, right? They share these genetic tissue in common. And so that's what brings us, even though everyone doesn't have a twin brother, but because we are part of geographic areas, we share geographic areas, we do also share this marker that's really important for transplantation, and actually even for transfusion, is the HLA gene. So why is the HLA gene even important? Because we're in transplantation, we tend to forget the original, the most important function of the HLA molecule is that it's involved in immune surveillance, right? So these are proteins that are expressed on surface of cells, and they survey the area. And if we're infected with a virus, it presents that peptide to the T cell and tells the T cell that this is an infected cell and targets it for destruction. Well, we're not based on different geographic areas, we may be exposed to different viruses. And so therefore, if you belong to an area, if you're in a European area versus if you are in the United States, you may express different HLA antigens. And the worst part of it is, which is good actually because it protects our cell, protects our system, the HLA antigen is highly polymorphic. That means there are so many different forms of that HLA protein. And the reason for this is because we are exposed to so many different viruses, bacteria, cells that are not supposed to be in our system. And that's why we have all of these HLA antigens, different forms of these HLA antigens that help protect us. In the same vein, HLA antigens are also highly immunogenic. So that means that if I don't share the same HLA antigen as you do, the tendency would be to reject an organ that's been was transplanted. Or in the case of transfusion, in some cases as well, there are reactions following transfusion. So the reason an African-American donor is the ideal donor for an African-American recipient is because we share this genetic information, this genetic material that makes us more like each other. And so it's not surprising that that living donor transplants, living donor, whether related or unrelated, as long as you are a good HLA match, do a better job, work better than other transplants. And so the reason is not simply that we want African Americans to become donors, but it's a life-saving, and it's life-saving for us. And being within that community, we know that we have a high likelihood of, as Yvette mentioned, of hypertension, of diabetes. And so we have relatives who are affected by these diseases. And so there is a way to help. And it's, you know, even if there are even mechanisms whereby you may not be compatible with that particular donor, recipient, and you consider providing this life-saving transplant to another person that would then allow it to be given to your recipient. But it's important to know that there is a genetic reason why we are better matches for our recipients.
If there are genes that are found, or the antigens that are found in racial groups that aren't shared in other racial groups. And that's what causes, there are some antigens that are unique to Hispanic population. In San Antonio, we have a very large Hispanic population. And so these antigens, when they're sensitized or they have blood transfusions with other Hispanics or African Americans, and they develop antibodies that are against these antigens that make it difficult to match unless you find within that same racial distribution. So that's another reason why the minorities are needed to donate, so that patients that have been sensitized or they're trying to find a good match for these patients may lie only within their same racial group.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy, and thank you, Dr. Philogene. This is all very insightful. And before we keep going, I do want to encourage, if anybody has any questions, just to feel free to type them into the chat, and we'll be able to see them and hopefully answer them as we go along or in our Q&A session. I do understand that some of this may get a little technical, if, you know, depending on your level of expertise, but again, we are very open to answering any questions, so please feel free. And now I'd like to bring in Dr. Gautreaux into the conversation, because I know you prepared some presentations for us. And
I wasn't going to talk about that yet. I was going to touch on what Cathi and Mary were talking about. HLA is the human version of the major histocompatibility complex. Big words, just means organ or tissue compatibility. There are minor histocompatibility antigens, and people of various ethnic groups are more likely to share those minors. So it's not only it's more than additive, but having the HLA being more likely to match as well as with the minor histocompatibility antigens just helps with guaranteeing long-term success.
Agreed.
So this is Yvette. So I just want to circle back around to why we need transplants. So again, in communities of color, particularly African Americans, diabetes and hypertension are the leading causes of renal failure or kidney failure. And so, you know, the importance of following treatment regimens for the treatment of those conditions cannot be understated. So we need to, as part of this conversation, we need to talk about why it's important to pay attention to your health, make sure that you are attending to, you know, taking your medications as prescribed. And if there are any issues with taking the medications that you're prescribed or any problems with your treatment regimen, is to have, you know, real fruitful conversations with your healthcare provider, because following those treatment regimens will save your life as well as save your organs. So I wanted that to be part of the conversation.
If I can just add, and just to elaborate a little bit further, I think as we continue to educate not only on organ donation, but as we go around the country, that we have to start adding measures of healthy diet, healthy exercising, because even that's a cause on the side of causing organ failure. It's also on the side of when death does occur, that we have people who would like to donate, but they're not healthy enough to donate. So it's important on both sides, not just for the side of for those who may be stricken by organ failure, but it's also important just as a life that we have to start taking better care of ourselves. We have to change our diet, exercise, all those things that we keep hearing every single day, that we have to really do those things, because we all want to have longevity in life. In order to have that, we have to start living healthier.
Thank you, Bobby. And yes, it's another reason for folks who usually say an apple a day keeps the doctor away. You know, it really does. We want to encourage, you know, healthy living and health and wellness. And, you know, if there's so many resources out there, and, you know, we're willing to put even more out there just to make sure everybody gets the education and the knowledge that they need, because it really is on us to make sure we're healthy. No one else is going to do it for us. So now to turn to Dr. Gautreaux, who will talk to really a bit more technical of this conversation, but really the importance of the APOL1, just to kind of talk about the you know, even a deeper reason for that.
Jonathan, are you going to advance, or do you want to give me, let me share my screen?
I think you can share your screen if you have the slides.
All right, let's try it. All right, can y'all see that okay?
Yep.
All right, this started well over 10 years ago as an initial observation. We had an 18-year-old African-American who was basically passed out while playing sports and became an organ donor. While the organs were allocated, it just so happened that one happened to be allocated to an African-American recipient, and the second one to a female Caucasian recipient. The African-American recipient was actually a better match than an HLA match than the Caucasian recipient. While as allocation was proceeding, it appeared that the biopsy shown here, the donor biopsy showed occult focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, disease that's often found in African Americans. So not knowing this up front, we began monitoring the recipient, and it turns out that the recipient, number one, the African American child, who actually lost his kidney due to idiopathic kidney disease, thought to be immunoglobulin-mediated nephritis, all the hallmarks of an FSGS-like syndrome, started to lose that kidney within 4 days of transplant, whereas the white recipient, to my knowledge, continues to have a healthy graft. This is well over a decade later. And that set our research team, led by nephrologist Dr. Barry Friedman, to figure out what was going on here. This case in particular, why did this happen so quickly? And through a lot of other study, they showed that it was due to variants in a gene called APOL1. APOL1 stands for apolipoprotein number 1, and it's ApoL1 is a part of the high density lipoproteins that float around your blood, the good cholesterol that we all hear about. It also serves as a natural protection against some forms of trypanosoma. So Trypanosoma brucei is a cattle disease in Africa transmitted by the tsetse fly. Just circulating regular ApoL1 in the bloodstream can kill brucei by causing it to swell up, and it actually interferes with its ability to regulate its internal endosomes, and potential will explode. There's another form of trypanosoma called brucei rhodesiensis that does cause African sleeping sickness in humans. Wild type or normal ApoL1 cannot lyse this particular parasite because it has a protein called SRA that inactivates it. Well, variants occurred just through normal evolution, and these variants can get around the protective factor of the trypanosome and cause it to lyse. Well, these variants are in the ApoL1 gene, so we call them variant ApoL1. But there's a problem. There are two variants, G1 and G2. And if you look here, this is Africa. In light green here is the area where Trypanosoma brucei rhodesiensis is endemic, or has been endemic throughout the course of history. And in light purple is where it's becoming endemic now. So if people in this area have either the one copy of the G1 or the G2, they are protected against the Trypanosoma brucei rhodesiensis and don't get African sleeping sickness. But if they have two copies, either two G1s, two G2s, or one G1 and one G2, they can get a 7 to 10-fold risk of disease. Now, if you look here, all of these circles, these are populations within these particular parts of Africa. You'll see that about 50% will have the normal or wild type. Anywhere from 15 to 40% may have the G1 variant, and then the balance having the G2 variant. Well, these variants here are pretty much heavily found within this particular area. This was also the so-called slave coast. So not going into the whole shameful history of slavery in the Americas, but these populations made up the bulk of the slaves that ended up in the Americas. They are also ones where we find these G1s and G2s. So what kind of diseases are we talking about? Well, we're talking about HIV-associated nephritis, end-stage renal disease of non-diabetic origin. So it is thought that a large number of the so-called hypertension-induced renal failure may actually be to a degree caused by the ApoL1 gene variants. So remember, if you have one, you're protected against sleeping sickness, and there's usually no problem associated with that. If you have two, then you can actually have one of these diseases that are shown here. So we did a study first at Wake Forest in 2011, which showed that recipients that got a kidney with two copies of ApoL1, either two G1s or two G2s or one of each, the so-called ApoL1 risk variants, then these kidneys don't last as long or have as good survival as ones with no risk. We took this study to a larger group and included other centers, including Emory and University of Alabama at Birmingham, and showed that, yes, it still holds out. Even with a larger population, we still tend to see that there is a risk of kidneys that have both gene variants. And then we published this one a couple of years ago with just the same groups, but a larger number of recipient and donor pairs, and showed that, yes, it's still holding and it's very statistically significant. So, all right, why am I bringing this up? We already know that African-American recipients tend to do better with African-American donors, kidneys from African-American donors, because of all the other minor histocompatibility antigens. But if these populations also have the high level of ApoL1 risk, then perhaps may not be such a good idea. So UNOS has what they call a kidney donor risk index, and these are risk factors assigned to a particular donor based on things like height and weight and age and ethnicity, and I put that in quotation marks. This KDRI, kidney donor risk index, is then used to calculate the kidney donor, excuse me, the kidney donor index, the PI. And basically this chart just shows that the higher the KDPI, the profile index, the more likely that these organs are to fail over the course of time. So blue is low KDPI, purple is high KDPI. So I bring this back to the KDRI, the risk index. And as you see here, the only ethnicity that has any kind of applicability of risk is African American. So Hispanic, no risk. Caucasian, no risk. Only African American. So this is already showing that a kidney from an African American donor is considered to be higher risk just based on the fact that it comes from an African American donor. Well, we think that the APOL1 risk variance explains quite a bit of what this actual risk is found. And I showed you those graphs with the APOL1 of 1 or 0 risk. That didn't take into account race. So that was equally mixed between African Americans and non-African Americans that were mixed in there. So I find it to be a little bit problematic that an important component of calculating risk is just whether or not the donor is African American or not. I mean, if you really want to go through the math, it's about an 18% or so risk index. So we are in the course of a large study called the APOL1 Long-Term Kidney Transplant Outcomes Network, or the Apollo study. And it is an NIH-sponsored study funded by the National Institutes of Health. And it's going to study the impact of APOL1 renal risk variance on the health of the kidney recipients. So it includes all comers, self-reporting as African American, Hispanic, Black, Afro-Caribbean, African, so on and so forth. All we're looking for is the presence or absence of the APOL1 risk variance. So right now, pretty much every transplant program in the United States, as well as all of the OPOs in the US, and a lot of the HLA laboratories that are associated with deceased donor typing are involved. And all that the study group is asking is for these representative institutions to send DNA or just whole blood to the to Wake Forest, not to my laboratory, to our research laboratory. They've been collecting all of these. We're just like every other lab. You know, every couple of months we take our little box and we bring it over to the research laboratory. But they are compiling all of this data to go through the outcomes with the UNOS data. So hopefully, right now, our preliminary study suggested that donors and recipients should not be paired if they are both carrying APOL1 risk variants. And that's actually been baked into our living donor program. And we're looking to see if this carries over also to deceased donor. And the Apollo study is being conducted to determine whether or not this is true. So that's all I have. If there's any questions, we can talk about them later on or take them offline. But I just wanted to let you all know that we're working on this to try to take out the so-called risk, the considered risk for African American donors.
So can I ask a quick question, just to follow up on that? Do you know the participation rate of African Americans in these studies? Because I think one of the weaknesses is knowing that certain diseases are associated with certain genetic background. It's important to not just have a population that's made up of primarily Caucasian participate in some of these studies, but to also have a good representation of African American. But I'm not sure that that is, I'm not sure that there's always a good representation of African American within these studies.
Well, this particular study, the study main participants are actually asking various laboratories to send various UNOS donors. So I believe that they are really taking into account the UNOS donors that are African American in this particular study.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Gautreaux. So that's
Like I said, if anybody has any questions, my email is out there and readily available.
yes. I was going to say.
Thank you for letting me talk about this.
Thank you so much for creating the slides. And for anyone that did enjoy that presentation, I do want to place a quick plug. Dr. Gautreaux is a professor. If you do want to take a class at Wake Forest School of Medicine and learn more about this, I think he'll be very happy to go through this lecture with you in detail, because that's very insightful.
Got a lot of canned talk, so you can just wind me up and I'll go.
Well, we're very thankful. We're very thankful. And you know, just on a serious note, it shows the need for diversity in donors, especially, you know, with this month that's, you know, supposed to be raising awareness for national minority donors. But you can see that there's a scientific need for it. There are risk factors, and there's systematic issues that we do need to talk about, right? That's part of why we want to start this conversation, is just to look at why that KDRI and KDPI even look at race as a factor and, you know, score different races higher or lower, right? And if there are studies going on that, you know, are trying to question this, or to really put pressure on UNOS or anybody to change this, we encourage everybody to get involved. You know, just find out where the study's going. We'll provide some resources and see how you can get involved, see how you can help move this conversation forward. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Gautreaux. That was excellent, and I do hope we have you on for more guest lectures. So
just the comment about, you know, equity and access to healthcare also includes, you know, equity and access to research and being participants in research projects like this, because that's the only way we can find out this kind of information, and that affects, you know, our ability to be our healthiest selves and to understand how, you know, each, you know, ethnic group or each group of individuals may have something integral to their physiology or their makeup that might either have a positive or, you know, a negative impact on their healthcare. So, and then access to being participants in research has always been a problem in the African American community, based on, as Dr. Howard said, the mistrust. At the core of any relationship where you're asking somebody literally to give you part of themselves in terms of blood and organs, and we have live organ transplants as well, you have to be able to trust the people that are asking you that information or asking you to participate. And when that trust is not at the core of that relationship, you're not going to get the participation that you would get if that relationship was a partnership, a trusted partnership.
yes, that's a great point. And that actually leads directly into the next part of this, which is to talk about the trust and the mechanisms to drive this recruitment and what is happening, whether it's with paired kidney donation programs or, you know, just activism in these communities, and, you know, just health education. And Lauren did just pose a question: what are some of the ways that the community is encouraging, you know, the trust to gain the African American donors? So, you know, Dr. Miller just spoke to that, but I invite you and Bobby to speak to some of these mechanisms and techniques, and what is working, what can be improved, and, you know, where can we start to put our focus?
You know, when you talk about what's working and what's not working, I really think you have to have boots on the ground. You know, it's one way. We're into this a time where we use a lot of social media and we want to do all these things, but we have to have boots on the ground. We have to have actual people in the communities, knocking on doors, going to community centers, going to all these places to encourage people in the community that health is very important. And that when you talk about health, you're talking about all these aspects of health. You're talking about donation, you're talking about heart disease, all these things, healthy diets, exercising. So when we have people in the community, that's what works. That's what I've noticed in my 25 years of doing this, that when you're in the community, people start building that trust. And you can't go in when you need one thing, and then as soon as you get what you need, you go back out, you don't come back anymore. So that's a part of building that trust. So that's what's working, partnering with community organizations, partnering with churches, partnering with fraternities and sororities to help get this message out, because healthcare is so vitally important. We see it each and every day on our news. We read about it. We hear about all these things. We just had the Chadwick Boseman died the other day, you know, of colon cancer. Those are things that we have to start getting that message out, that we have to get our things checked. We have to go to the doctor. We have to do all these type of things. So when we get that message out in the community, I have found that the community is more welcoming, that because we're there every day, we're partnering with them. And then we always have to realize too, is that even though we're talking about health, when we go to the communities, our issues isn't the most important thing all the time.
Yes.
Absolutely. In the African American community, there are multiple competing priorities for our time and our resources. And so blood donation and organ transplantation are absolutely important. But when you're trying to keep food on the table and trying to make sure that your kids now have all access online that they need, for this school year, as well as, challenges in terms of, transportation and access to collection sites and access to, information about organ donation. And Dr. Howard is absolutely right. There has to be people in the entering into the community that look like the community. And this is not to say that the African American community is not accepting, but like every community, you literally and figuratively need somebody to speak your language. When you go into the Latinx community, you need people that are Latino, and can speak the language, but also have that connection on a cultural level. So one of the significant deficits in terms of interacting with the African American community is lack of cultural competency, lack of understanding what is important to the community. Blood donation is as important to us as it is in every other community, but you have to understand those additional competing priorities and speak to that and talk about that. How can we meet whatever organization that wants to enter into the community and partner with the community? How can we help you meet the other needs in your community first? And then once we meet those needs, then we can talk about the needs of this organization. But we have to work with the priorities and the commitments of the community before we start asking them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that there have been some studies that have shown that when they survey that community, there are several concerns that may also apply to other communities, but maybe have not yet been addressed. If you want to become an organ donor, there are people that are concerned about, African American recipients are very concerned about asking other African American people to become donors. So how do we circumvent that? How do we give them the tools so that they can go and talk to their community if they're recipients, if they need an organ, how do you give them the tool to go talk about this in the community? The other issue is many African American donors, if they have to take the time off to do the donation, how are they going to be supplemented? Who's going to take care of the family? Who's going to take care of the fact that they have to go to work and they sometimes have to manage 2 or 3 jobs? So I think that there has been research as to why there is a shortage. In addition to the mistrust, the next steps are, how do we address these issues? Because I think that people have been talking. The next steps are to not just talk, but try to put the infrastructure in place so that if we keep asking, then we have to solve some of the problems that are inherent to this.
I know that for our live donor kidney transplant program, we have a very active education process. And I think that it all starts with education. It's very important to educate both our coordinators that are doing the education and our patients as to what are their opportunities and what are their, how do they, just like you said, ask somebody to become a donor for them. And we have donor advocates and they have town hall meetings and they have a champion. How do you go get a champion for your family? You can't ask somebody to be a donor, but you have somebody in your family, maybe they can't donate for you, but they can go out and ask other people for you. So there are different educational mechanisms that we've used in our live donor program, and I know that are out there that can actually help educate the recipients and the donors as to what this process involves and how to get involved. But the town hall meetings and the grassroots meetings, I think that those are so important to gain trust within the whole community. And it's been effective in ours. And then we also have, when it's not so blistering hot, walks and runs where it's walk with a doctor. And so the nephrologist gets out there and they go and do a 5K walk, and everybody's encouraged to participate, not only for the exercise, but to ask your questions, to walk with the transplant surgeons, to whoever's involved in this. And they all get the opportunity to ask questions, meet the team that's involved, become more familiar, and maybe start to gain some of that trust.
Yeah, and what Cathy's talking about is very important. The problem is that since March, all of those kind of initiatives have fallen off because of COVID. I mean, all outreach at our institution has stopped. I mean, it's beginning to gradually, now that the institution considers itself to be financially stable again, but our main outreach person decided to retire. So it's like this whole COVID crisis has really put a crimp in the outreach.
So I don't know how the other vendors, I mean, while people have been at home, I've seen multiple, especially when we started back, when, you know, we were gradually going back into, you know, back into work, and the restaurants were opening. There have been multiple, you know, commercials, advertisement for, you know, come back to us and we're safe and all of these things. And I think that we, you know, as a community, if we're so concerned about, I mean, the sickle cell issue is a pretty significant issue. Why not attract people that way? Why not use those venues to educate, especially the African-American youth, use different mechanisms to educate the African-American youth so that they grow up knowing that these are the things that they have to do in order to help their community.
In my 25 plus years of doing this community outreach for organ and tissue donation, what I have found to be very successful and what has worked, and I keep going back to boots on the ground, the old school way of being active in the community. Commercials, radio advertisement, all those things are great, but our community needs someone who looks like them, who's either received or who's donated, because we are very visual people, what I found out. And if we can talk about and have commercials and all these things, but if we don't have someone who looks like us, who's either received or donated, to share their testimony, to share their story, then we sometimes feel, well, that doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect me. So we have to find and recruit champions who've either received or donated to go out and speak that truth as they go back into their own community. And when you start speaking that truth, it starts heading on. And then we also must attract community leaders. We have to attract community leaders to let community leaders know this is what's going on in your community. If we don't act now, you may wake up one day, you may be speaking to yourself, because a health crisis is coming. We're already in the pandemic. And this is just the underline of all the other comorbidities that are already out there. Now you put this pandemic on top of it. Now there's something else you have to be concerned about. So it's one of those cycles. And this is the great thing about being on a panel and being with great people like yourselves, that we're able to discuss all these things, from the community outreach to the HLA, to all these things we can discuss to give people information and knowledge to see that we have to do something, and now is the time to do it. We can't sit around and wait any longer. Now is the day that we have to start taking action.
And when I'm on panels like this, I see everybody as we are now allies in supporting each other. So, you know, please, however you need to, I'm offering for everybody. However you need to use all of us, you know, we are a team now. So please consider us, you know, your supporters, your experts, your allies, because, you know, we understand the need, both personally and professionally, you know, getting this message out and doing it in a culturally competent way. And just one last thing, I know we got to wrap up, Jonathan, but, you know, in the African-American community, we have so many health fairs. Even now, during COVID, there are health fairs, the sororities and fraternities are doing outreach. that's how organizations start participating and giving back and being visible, is by participating as vendors in these health fairs and supporting the African American community and communities of color. That's extremely important.
Yes, well said, well said. And you know, for anyone watching, I think you can now see why we're very lucky to have this specific panel. Is, you know, you can see the passion, you can see the attention to detail in every single aspect of this journey. And you know, one thing I want to do make clear is that this is going to be the first of many. This is not going to be a one and done. We want this to keep going. We want, it may be in the form of a virtual webinar, maybe after COVID, we can have people come together for, you know, in-person meetings. We want to have these efforts going, and I'll present a slide that'll show some information on how to help. But this is first of many. This is a conversation that needs to be addressed, and it's something that's so deep-rooted in so many parts of this country's society that it's not going to be fixed overnight. And so, again, we could talk about this for another 45 minutes, but, you know, just to wrap up here and let everybody get back to their Mondays, we do want to get into the Q&A session, and Joseph's here helping us get those questions in. So Joe, if you want to read some of the questions.
Definitely, and thank again to the panelists. Really, really great conversation, guys. So first question we have from Dr. Robert Bray. So the UNA's data has shown that independent of donor race, when an African-American is the recipient, the survival is less. In addition, NMDP data shows that Caucasian to Caucasians have a greater likelihood of finding a donor, yet African-Americans looking within the African-American pool are less likely to find a match. I think this is something you touched on, Michael. Could you continue on that?
Well, I mean, it's not anything that we're doing. It's part of the, like Mary explained and Cathi explained also, these antigens are found within predominantly various groups. But it's not just the antigens themselves, it's the whole collection of the antigens as a group as they are inherited. So the ones that are common, say, to white Northern Europeans, A1, B, A, DR17, that's found, that was probably help with, you know, protection against Black Death. I'm just speculating, I have no idea. Whereas some of the other ones are found, say, let's just say A2 and something else, it's how they're inherited. You get a chromosome from mom and a chromosome from dad. And it's not necessarily that a person has rare antigens individually, they have rare combinations. And that's where it really makes it problematic. And any of those mismatches at any of those possible combinations could be a potential source for rejection in the case of solid organ transplantation, or graft versus host disease in the case of bone marrow transplantation.
Just to touch a little bit on what you said about that, we didn't really talk a whole lot about it, but the sensitization status of the patients when you have blood transfusions or you receive a kidney and you reject the kidney, then you develop antibodies to HLA antigens, and it is documented that African Americans have higher sensitization rates than Caucasians, so that makes them automatically harder to match. So that's one thing to overcome. And then I think also on the bone marrow side, when you start looking at trying to find matches for mixed race individuals and patients, it becomes even much more difficult, because if you have antigens that are found in maybe only one population and not the other, but now you have rare combinations, as Mike was saying, between, say, an Asian and a Black person, then it's going to be very difficult to find a well-matched donor on the bone marrow side. So there's a lot of complicating factors that go into this.
Yeah, and then we didn't talk about medication, because the treatment with immunosuppression varies also depending on based on race. So I won't, we can tackle that at another time.
Yes, as you can tell, I'm writing notes because I'm already putting together the program for the next one. But yeah, thank you so much. This is exactly what we're going for, and I'm so bummed for it to be already 10 o'clock. But one more question, maybe.
One more question, definitely. So we have a question from Anne. So she wants to say that currently in Canada, the Indigenous patients face unique challenges, and one of these is the lack of distrust in the medical system. And I think that goes also to a question from Glenn. And this has to do with medical systems due to past and current injustices, inequality faced by the community. Do you think there are similar issues in, say, the African-American patient population? And does this affect things such as recruitment of living donors from friends and family? And it's along the same vein of what one of our participants, Glenn, mentioned, is what are we doing to destigmatize donation in the Black community? And maybe that's something that Yvette and Bobby could speak to.
Thank you for those questions. I mean, that's the hard work, is trying to destigmatize, blood donation and organ donation. And again, some of the thinking, in terms of culturally, African Americans and people certainly have spoken to, they say things like, I want to be buried with all my organs, and, I don't believe in that. So, we do have to appeal to figure out how to appeal to the African American community in a different way, communicating that, Black folks have always taken care of each other. We've always rallied around each other in our community. This is just another way to do it. So we have to, encourage people to step outside themselves and step outside their beliefs and communicate that, organ donation and blood donation is just another way that we support each other in our community. So it is a struggle, and it's something that we have to figure out a way to consistently do is change that message and that narrative.
Definitely. I think it's something that Bobby even mentioned himself about boots on the ground and being in the community, and not just for specific things, but being around and being available. I think that's also a good point that he listed out.
And if I can just add a little bit onto that, and it keeps going back to building great community partners. When you have mistrust and you of healthcare, start recruiting African-American physicians, Hispanic physicians to help you with your message. You have the issue with folks want to be buried with all their organs. Now you start bringing in your religious leaders and your leaders to help shape that message. Because one thing that I found, especially being here in the Bible Belt in the South in Georgia, is that when we started recruiting and getting involved with our church leaders, we start seeing our numbers go up. Now the trust was there, because once the church leaders start letting us come in and give us that space to talk to their congregation, the people in the community started embracing us and started trusting us. So once again, boots on the ground, building community partners, and bringing out your community leaders as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I will
Back to you.
just one more question that came into the panel, and then we'll wrap it up. This is from Kelly Hitchman. How can the HLA labs, who are more behind the scenes, better support our patients in their need for racially sensitive care and education? So this will probably go into Dr. Gautreaux, Dr. Cathi, and Dr. Philogene.
Yeah,
What do you guys think?
I think the best thing that we as HLA laboratorians can do is focus on trying to find safe antigens, ones that if a patient is very highly sensitized, what are they not sensitized to? Can we identify that? And sometimes even as wonderful as the 1 lambda PRA products are, they have shortcomings, and sometimes they give false positive results. Take it the extra mile if you can. Do surrogate cross-matching. Really try to identify what is safe for a particular patient, because that right there is probably the best thing that we as laboratorians can do.
Go ahead, Mary.
I also think that we have to be, I'm going to be very brief. We have to be very careful. We're using very sophisticated tools now to identify match. And one of them is eplet mismatch or eplet matching system. And we have to be sure that when we do that, it doesn't disadvantage a certain group. And so it has to be well structured so that, it doesn't exclude certain populations or certain groups based on this number, just number of eplets.
I think that just to wrap up what both of you said, is that these patients, these highly sensitized patients, especially ones that are really, really highly sensitized, require more work. We probably spend 90% of our work on 10% of our patients. That's kind of my rule. because they do require extra work and trying to figure out exactly what they have and what they can receive as something that would be compatible. And I know in my kidney pair donor program, I didn't talk a lot about that, but I look for the least incompatible donor. Maybe I'm not going to be able to find a totally compatible donor for my recipient, but what I do is try to find the least one and the one that's going to work the best, and then hope the medication, the plasmapheresis, the immune modulating that we can do that will allow these patients that are truly highly sensitized to be transplanted. We just have to do extra work. We have to work extra hard for them, and they deserve our work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, so, and that same struggle that they have in the HLA lab, we have in the IRL lab trying to identify blood products for our sickle cell patients. So it's that same issue with, having to struggle to find that specific product for that recipient who has a lot of antibodies. So we're all in the same place. So that is the last time I'm for real.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. So let me just share this final slide just to provide people some resources. Let me just pull that up. And then we promise to wrap up and let everybody get back to their day. But just to wrap up. So again, first of all, thank you so much to the panel, to the internal team here. So, people you haven't seen on camera, you just see Joseph, but to Liz, Molly, Carmen, just everybody that really helped put this together on such short notice. Thank you so much. And of course, to the rest of our marketing team and our extended, commercial team who helped get the word out there. So thank you so much, everybody, for getting this together. And again, we're hoping this is not the last time. But just to wrap this up, and I want to do a special thanks to the African Heritage Employee Resource Group at Thermo Fisher, who were very, very generous and have offered to put a donation towards AMAT, so Association of Multicultural Affairs and Transplantation, which is where Dr. Bobby Howard was the former president, and then of course the American Red Cross, a blood drive that's coming up that Dr. Miller did mention. So the African Heritage Group has offered to sponsor this, and we're very grateful because this is something that is important to minorities in general, but specifically people of African heritage. So very, very thankful for that. And the resources are out there. This is amat1.org, but you can also go to the American Red Cross website. You can go to our website. We'll provide some resources. And we encourage you, if anything, just to educate yourself, just to learn and just be open to seeing just how different it is for different communities. And we will keep this conversation going at another time. We were way over our time. But again, I want to be very, very clear that this is not the last time. And again, thank you so much to all the speakers. Thank you to all our support team, and even the people behind the scenes just helping connect. Jocelyn Reed is on, and she helped put me in contact with Bobby Howard. So it's just, this isn't something that can be done by one person. And just given how we can do this as a small team, imagine what we can do as a whole transplant and transfusion community. So with that, I would let everybody get back to their Mondays, or very busy Mondays. But again, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the week.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye,
so
guys.
much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.